Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Great to see you here. Now I have just returned from a couple of weeks over in New Zealand and I was shooting a lot of images with some great friends over there. It was a bit of a group of us. But what this video is about is how I sort of shot and edited some of the panoramas that I shot while I was over there. Now I shot three particular panoramas I want to show you in this video, and I decided to shoot them with a wide open aperture of f1.8. Now I was shooting with the 20mm f1.8 lens on my Nikon Z6 Mark II, and I decided to do that because it was just so dark. Now I didn't have a star tracker with me, I wasn't doing any of that, I was just way too busy helping with the people that were there with us on this trip. So I had to do it really quickly. And so this video is about, well, I shot wide open apertures, but what problems did I potentially come across by doing that? So let's just get onto the computer here and I will show you the three different panoramas I shot, and I'll show you some of the raw images and see what they look like after I've done some editing to them. So this is the first image I'd like to show you here today. This is at a gorgeous place called Mirror Lakes, and as you can see, it's living right up to its name. Beautiful Milky Way reflection in the water in the foreground, mist in the background, Milky Way, a touch of aurora on the left-hand side, which I absolutely loved. The thing I want to draw your attention to is the detail that you can see in the foreground and the mountains in this image. Now, to illustrate that a little bit better, I want to show you one of the images. So this is made up of 12 images, and you can see the first one here in portrait orientation. If you have a look up here, it's shot at 20mm f1.8, 15-second shutter speed, ISO 6400. Now, I did push this one pretty hard in camera, and that is what this video is all about. So let's look at the before and after. So image on the left is how it came straight out of the camera, very dark as you can see, and with a little bit of exposure, plus 40, shadows plus 100, a fair bit. And everything else is pretty much level except for boxes here on remove chromatic aberration, profile corrections, etc. That's it. A touch of white balance adjustments. Now this is an Astro modified camera, so the white balance does need a fair bit of adjustment. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to get some detail out of this foreground here, shooting wide open at f1.8. And the other thing I have to stress here is dealing with the inherent vignette that is involved in shooting wide open. Now, one thing I forgot to show you, and I'll go down and show you this, is I went down to lens corrections, manual lens corrections, and applied plus 84 in the vignette. And what that does, it lightens up the edges of the frame. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, it's quite obvious, really. The reason I want to do that is to make the stitching of the panorama more effective. One of the things you will find with a lot of panoramas is you will get black stitching lines when there's a lot of vignetting, because I'm crossing over these pictures. Now I shot 12, you can see them all down the bottom here. I did a lot of overlap. That's another thing. So first clue is the vignette control. Second is the overlap. Lots and lots of overlap. People will say 50%. I reckon I've done more than 50% on these images. If you have a look, I reckon there's more like 75% that I've gone here. And that's deliberate. I've done that because I want to make sure that I cover everything that is needed to cover in these images. That's what I did with this one. I stitched the panorama in Microsoft Ice Image Composite Editor, which is a fantastic program. I've showed you this before, but you could probably do this one fairly simply in Photoshop, maybe even a Lightroom. But I've got to take this image into Photoshop because what I did, which I'm not going to go into detail here, but I used Star Exterminator to edit the sky portion of this image separately to the foreground. I also applied Topaz denoise, and this is the end result. And look, this is a great image. There's a little bit of light spillage down here on these flowers. That was from the other people that were next to me. There was about 10 of us lined up on this boardwalk. You'll also note I've done a little bit of cropping and changing the image here, because down, you'll see in this image here, for example, there's a fair bit of the boardwalk. This light here is coming from the back screen of somebody's camera. So I had to get rid of all of that, and I've cropped the image in a bit to help with that as well. But in the end, I think this is a fantastic image shot wide open at f1.8. All right, now you can actually do the same principle here using single framing. So in other words, not shooting a panorama, because I often do that. And when you shoot wide open at that f1.8 aperture, you will get that natural vignette, which sometimes actually adds to the appeal of an image. Anyway, let's move on to our second pano that I shot. So for my second panorama I want to show you here, this was much more challenging than the first, mainly because of the weather conditions. It was really cold, really windy, and just quite brutal conditions, around about 0 degrees or maybe a bit less than that. Now you will see here, you can see there's some people that I was with, all scattered all the way along the shoreline here. I left them in because that's what this trip was all about. It was a group adventure, and I'd just like to be able to remember them. I shot the foreground as a separate panorama to the sky. So in this case, I shot 23 images of the foreground at f1.8, 15-second shutter speeds. I'll show you a couple of those here now, at ISO 5000. So that's a 20mm focal length, so that's pushing quite hard. Now, once again, this is just one image, but I'll show you the before and after. And you can see it's really dark. Even at those settings, that's a pretty dark image. I did plus 60, plus 100 in the shadows, and not much else except that vignette control that I've already talked about in the last image. I did that with all of these. Not so much important in this part of the image because I'm going to be replacing the sky. I told you I shot 23 of these images, and once again, the overlap is extreme. And that is one of the keys. I keep reiterating, lots and lots of overlap. It always makes stitching a panorama easier, no matter how you look at it. Now, I did 2 rows. How I came up with 23 images, well, it's nobody's business really. I probably overshot one of the ends, I would say, because when you shoot panoramas, you lose the top and bottom corners. But you can see all the images down the bottom here as I've gone along. This is, of course, after the corrections is done. Like someone's shining a torchlight down there into the river. That's what you get when you're with a group of people. So there's the before and after shot of that one. And we went right across here to the other end, and you can see there's the sky. So that's a twin row portrait orientation. And then I shot the sky. Now the sky at this location at this time was very high in the sky. You can see it here. So the Milky Way is setting over these mountains, but when I shot this image, the Milky Way was still quite high in the sky. There's 10 images here which are shot across. So even though I shot 23 for the foreground, I only shot 10 for the sky because that's pretty much all I needed to shoot. The foreground was overshot. Now with this, I processed it separately, so I produced 2 separate panoramas, and you will see here once again the before and after shots. Color correction, yes. I would have put these through Star Exterminator to do my edits. So you can see there what I've done is essentially I've deliberately darkened the foreground. You can see that here. All of the foreground part of the image, except for the cloud and the snow, but it's pretty dark. And that is a deliberate ploy because whenever I want to use just a sky part of an image, well, the foreground becomes irrelevant. I'll probably be cropping it out anyway. So that's one of the main differences between these images and the previous ones. This is a rough image of the foreground panorama that I shot. And then I created a sky panorama, and then I overlaid that using sky replacement in Photoshop to end up with this end result. And look, this is a great image. It really shows the grandeur and majesty of this location. But I used that lens wide open at f1.8, and you can see some incredible detail. I mean, you zoom in there, look at that. This is a wide open infinity focus at f1.8. Now, some of you will say, well, what about the close foreground? Well, let's just have a look at this first. Now you can see the bridge down there, the water and everything else looks fantastic. The close foreground, well, yeah, obviously the close foreground is going to be a little less clean. But I'll tell you one thing, it was windy. It's blowing around like crazy. So no matter what I do, it's not going to be clean. Now, this rock, yes, it's too close to be absolutely sharp. So you can see it there. But am I worried about that rock? No. I didn't want to do any focus stacking. I had to shoot this very, very quickly. But in the end, absolutely love it. All right, so as you can see, this one's worked out really well. I had to shoot a lot of foreground images, but sometimes you don't need to shoot as many images and still get a great result. So our next image that I want to show you, the next pano, I only used a single framing in the portrait orientation, so I'll show you that one. Okay, so we come to our third and final image. This is also a panorama shot at high ISO, very wide open aperture f1.8. And you can see the final result here, which I am absolutely wrapped in. Now, the thing that I was most concerned about shooting this, I'm on a beach and I wanted to include the complete sweep of the beach in the foreground. And that balances this image out perfectly. And I was happy to include some people from our group on the right hand side there, the same as before. This particular location is very close to the town of Wanaka in New Zealand, and also a little bit of spillage from some local houses which are in the district, but not too much to bother me. In fact, you can see a little bit of light spilling onto the beach in the foreground, and I was okay with that. So I haven't added any lights whatsoever to this frame. You can see the Milky Way there in the sky. Gorgeous. Now this is actually 15 separate frames. Now let me show you those. Here's the first one. Now you can see what I did here. I only had a single row, but lots and lots of overlap once again. So I want to reiterate here, lots of overlap when you're shooting wide open apertures to help with that vignette problem. And once again, you will see the adjustments I've done here. I've added a bit of exposure, dropped the highlights, and that was only because I wanted to protect some of the stars there. Now up here, let me go down to the, here we go, the vignette control. I've added plus 53. You know, it varies depending on the image and it depends on the lens and so forth. And you can see there I've gone right across to the other side of the frame, and there's the people I was talking about. Now, when I'm shooting this, I'm thinking to myself, I know I'm going to be cropping the ends out. So the end result of the image may not necessarily need to include all of this space on the end, which it didn't. By doing this in a single row, this is a much easier panorama to shoot than the previous two, much easier to edit. But I've done the same concept with editing with this frame as I did with all the others. I've used Microsoft Ice Image Composite Editor to do the actual panorama stitching. And then I've taken the image into Photoshop. I've used Star Exterminator on the sky here, added a bit of clarity into the foreground here just to make it pop out a bit more. I've done a few curves adjustments in Photoshop, etc. Also done topaz noise reduction over the entire image before I put the stars back into the sky. And this is the end result. Now, I have to say, this is one of my favorite images from the whole trip. And it's interesting because I used the same technique wherever I went on this trip. If I was there by myself and I had more time, maybe I would do something a bit different. I might be able to shoot longer foreground exposures at a lower ISO. But in the end, I think you'll agree with me. I don't think you could really complain about the quality of this image shot the way that I did do it. Now, I've been shooting these panoramas with this methodology for quite a few years now and very, very happy with the results. So if I'm in a dark location somewhere and it's impossible to actually light it with any sort of light source, I will just open that aperture wide open, and I know that I'm pretty confident I'm going to get a pretty decent result in the end. All right, well, I hope that was somewhat helpful to you in shooting very low light panoramas and dealing with the particular issues involved in doing so. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have a fantastic week.